Chapter 7, which is about how Moomintroll rescues the Snork Maiden from a poisonous bush, and in which the comet appears in the sky. The 4th of October dawned clear, but there was a strange haze over the sun as it rose slowly over the mountain tops and sailed across the red sky. They hadn't set up the tent for the night, but had kept going all the time. Sniff had got a blister on one foot and was grumbling. "Well, walk on the other foot," said Snufkin. But this wasn't very helpful advice, and at last Sniff couldn't stand it any longer. "Oh," he moaned, "now I feel giddy," and he lay down and refused to go any farther. "We're in a hurry," said Moomintroll. "I must find that little Snork as quickly as "I know," interrupted Sniff. "Your wretched Snork Maiden. But that's nothing to do with me. I feel terrible, and I think I'm going to be sick." "We could wait a bit, couldn't we?" said Snufkin. "And I know something we can do meanwhile. Have you ever rolled stones?" "No," said Moomintroll. First Snufkin found a heap of great boulders. "You take a boulder," he said, "like this. Roll it as hard as you can over the edge of the precipice, like this, and it rushes down," he puffed, "like that." Together they looked over the edge and watched the stone. It crashed its way down, carrying a shower of small stones with it, and for a long time the echo rumbled back and forth between the mountains. "That was great fun," burst out Moomintroll. "Let's do another." And they rolled another huge boulder onto the edge, where it balanced precariously. "Heave, ho!" shouted Snufkin. "Heave and push!" Away thundered the boulder, but oh horror! Moomintroll didn't have time to draw back, and before anyone realized what was happening, he was over the edge and falling swiftly in the wake of the boulder. Now there would be very likely one less Moomintroll in the world if he had not had a rope tied around his middle. Snufkin threw himself on the ground and braced himself for the shock, and it was a big one. Snufkin felt as if he would be cut in half. Moomintroll swung to and fro on the end of the rope, and he was heavy. Snufkin was dragged slowly nearer and nearer to the edge. Behind him, too, the rope was pulled tight, and Sniff, who was tied to the other end, began to get pulled along. "Stop it!" he shouted. "Leave me alone. I'm ill." "You'll be still worse in a minute if you don't hold on to that rope," said Snufkin. And then Moomintroll's voice bellowed up from below. "Help! Pull me up!" At last Sniff realized what was happening, and he was so frightened that he forgot to be ill. He began struggling frantically against the pulling rope, which got thoroughly tangled around him and everything else in sight, until in the end it caught fast, and Snufkin was able to crawl back. "When I say now, pull," he told Sniff. "Not now, but now!" And they pulled with all their might, until at last Moomintroll appeared over the edge. First his ears, then his eyes, then his nose, then still more nose, and eventually the whole of him. "Well, strike me pink!" he exclaimed. "I never thought I should see you two again." "And you never would have done but for me," remarked Sniff complacently. Snufkin gave him a queer look, but didn't say anything, and they all sat down to recover themselves. "We've been stupid," said Moomintroll suddenly. "You've been stupid," said Sniff. "Absolutely criminal," went on Moomintroll, taking no notice. "We might easily have rolled one of those stones onto the little Snork Maiden." "If you did, she's flat by now," said Sniff, quite unmoved. Moomintroll was dreadfully worried. "Well, anyhow, we must go on now," he said dejectedly. "It's no good forgetting about that comet." So on they went, steadily down the mountainside, with the pale sun shining overhead out of the pale red sky. At the foot of the mountain, a clear, shallow stream with a sandy bed ran between the stones, and there sat the Hemulin, with his tired feet in the water, sighing to himself. Beside him was a large book called Moths of the Eastern Hemisphere, Their Behavior and Misbehavior. Extraordinary, he was muttering. Not one with a red tail. It might have been Dideriformia archimboldes, but that is very common and has no tail at all. And he sighed again. Just then Moomintroll, Snufkin, and Sniff popped out from behind a rock and said, "Hello!" "Oh, how you frightened me!" gasped the Hemulin. "So it's only you three again. I thought it was another avalanche. This morning it was terrible." "What was?" asked Sniff. "The avalanche, of course," answered the Hemulin. "Quite terrible. Rocks the size of houses, bouncing about like hailstones. My best glass jar was broken, and I myself had to move quite quickly to get out of the way." "I'm afraid we happened to knock a few stones down as we were passing," said Snufkin. "It's so easily done walking on these tracks." "Do you mean to say it was you who made the avalanche?" said the Hemulin. "Well, yes, sort of," Snufkin answered. "I never thought very much of you," said the Hemulin slowly, "and now I think even less. In fact, I don't think I want to know you any more." And he turned away and splashed some water over his tired feet. Snufkin and the others didn't quite know what to say, so they kept silent. After a while, the Hemulin looked over his shoulder and remarked, "Haven't you gone yet?" "We're just going," said Moomintroll. "But first I feel it's my duty to ask you if you haven't noticed something odd about the color of the sky." "The color of the sky?" asked the Hemulin innocently. "Yes," said Moomintroll. "That's what I said." "Why ever should I?" said the Hemulin. "It can be spotted for all I care. I hardly ever look at it. What worries me is that my beautiful mountain stream is nearly dried up. If it goes on like this much longer, I shan't be able to splash my feet." And he turned away again, muttering and growling to himself. "Come on," said Moomintroll. "I think he'd rather be alone." The ground was getting softer to walk on. It was thick with lichen and moss, and a few shy flowers peeped out here and there, while below them the dark carpet of the forest looked quite near. "We'll make straight for this flowering valley of yours," said Snufkin, "because we must get there before the comet comes." Moomintroll looked at his compass. "I think there's something wrong with this thing," he said. "It's dancing about like a midge over water." "It's the comet's fault, I expect," said Snufkin. "We shall have to go by the sun," said Snufkin, "though it doesn't seem to be much use either just now." A little farther down they came to a tarn which had sunk so low in its stone basin that the sides were too steep for them to get down and have a swim. There was a rim of weeds and rushes some feet above the water level, and it was still wet. "Funny," said Snufkin, with wrinkled forehead. "The water sinking as much and as quickly as that." "There must be a hole in the bottom," said Sniff, "for the water to run out of." "The Hemulin stream had sunk too," said Moomintroll. Sniff looked anxiously into their lemonade bottle, but to his relief that seemed to have as much in it as before. "I can't understand it," he said. "Never mind, Sniff," said Moomintroll. "Perhaps it's better if you can't. Come on now." Just then they heard a cry for help. It came from the wood just ahead of them, and they set off at top speed to the rescue. "All right," shouted Snufkin. "We're coming." "Not so fast," panted Sniff. "Ow!" For he had fallen over, and was being dragged along on his nose by the rope, which still tied the three of them together. But the others didn't stop until they too were brought up nose to nose on each side of a tree, with the rope hooked across its trunk. "Darned rope," Moomintroll said angrily. Sniff was shocked. "Oh!" he gasped. "You swore!" Moomintroll ignored him, and hacking at the rope with his knife, muttered something about it being the Snork Maiden who had called. The moment he was free, he set off again as fast as his short legs would carry him. The next minute, the Snork came panting up, green with terror. Snufkin didn't recognize him at first, because, as you may remember, the Snork was mauve when they had met before. "Hurry!" he screamed. "My sister! A terrible bush! It's eating her up!" And to their horror, they found that this was actually the case. A poisonous bush of the dangerous Angostura family had got hold of the little Snork Maiden's tail and was now dragging her towards it, while she uttered shrill cries and struggled with all her might. "Miserable bush!" cried Moomintroll, and brandishing his penknife, the new one with a corkscrew and an instrument for taking the stones out of horses' hooves, he circled around it, shouting rude names such as earthworm, scrubbing brush, and rat-tailed pest. The bush glared at Moomintroll with all its greeny yellow flower eyes, and at last let go of the Snork Maiden and stretched its twining arms towards him instead. Snufkin and the others watched the wild battle that followed, hardly daring to breathe. Moomintroll lunged about, with his tail beating angrily, and all the time he attacked the Angostura's waving arms. A howl of terror was heard from the spectators when one of the green arms twisted itself round Moomintroll's nose, but it changed to a triumphal war cry when he chopped off the arm with a single blow. Then the fight became more violent. The bush was trembling all over, and Moomintroll was quite red in the face with fury and effort. For a long time you could see nothing but a whirl of arms, tails, and legs. The Snork Maiden found a big stone which she threw into the middle of the fight. But as the stone hit Moomintroll in the tummy, it didn't help much. "Oh dear," moaned the Snork Maiden. "I've killed him." "Just like a girl," said Sniff. But Moomintroll wasn't dead yet. He came up fighting harder than ever, and cut off one after another of the Angostura's arms. When nothing but a tree stump was left, he folded up his knife and said, in a rather superior manner, Sniff thought, "Well, that's that." "Oh, how brave you are," whispered the Snork Maiden. "Oh, I do that sort of thing nearly every day," said Moomintroll airily. "Do you?" said Sniff. "I've never—" But he got no farther than a squeak, because Snufkin had trodden on his toe. "What was that?" asked the Snork Maiden with a start, because she was rather nervous after her dreadful experience. "Don't be frightened," said Moomintroll. "I'm here to protect you. I've got a little present for you, too." And he produced the gold ankle ring. "Oh!" exclaimed the Snork Maiden, turning quite pink with pleasure. "I thought I'd lost it. Oh, how wonderful!" She put the ring on at once, and then turned and twisted, trying to see the effect. "She's been fussing about that ring for 2 days," said the Snork. "She could hardly eat. And now, if you are all willing, I suggest we go on to a little glade that I know, and hold a meeting. I think we have more important things than rings to discuss." So the Snork led them to his glade, and there they sat in a circle and waited. "Well," said Moomintroll, "what are we going to talk about?" "About the comet, of course," answered the Snork, glancing fearfully at the red sky. "First of all, I elect myself president and secretary of this meeting. Are there any objections?" Nobody had any objections, and the Snork tapped the ground 3 times with his pencil. The Snork Maiden thought he was killing an ant. "Was it a poisonous one?" she asked with interest. "Hush, you're disturbing the meeting," said her brother. "It will fall on the 7th of October at 8:42 p.m., perhaps 4 seconds later." "What? The poisonous ant?" asked Moomintroll, who was a bit mixed up, what with the battle with the bush and the Snork Maiden's beauty. No, the comet," said the Snork impatiently. "Now we must ask ourselves what should be done." "We thought we'd go home as quickly as possible," said Moomintroll. "I hope you and your sister will come with us." "I shall have to think it over," answered the Snork. "We can go more deeply into the question at the next meeting." "Listen," interrupted Snufkin. "This has got to be decided at once. It's the 4th of October today, and it's already afternoon. We have exactly 3 days to reach Moomin Valley." "Do you live there?" asked the Snork Maiden. "Yes," said Moomin Troll. "It's a wonderful valley, and just before we left I made a swing, and Sniff has discovered a magnificent cave that I shall show you." "Wait a minute," said the Snork, tapping the ground again. "Keep to the point, please. Now, is it possible for us to reach there before the comet, and if so, can we be safe in this valley of yours?" "It's been all right up to now," said Sniff. "Mamma will think of something," said Moomin Troll. "You must see the cave where I've buried my pearls." "Pearls!" burst out the Snork Maiden excitedly. "Could ankle rings be made out of pearls?" "I should just think they could," said Moomin Troll. "Ankle rings and nose rings and ear rings and engagement rings." "That's a question for later," said the Snork cut in, thumping furiously with his pencil. "Be quiet now. My dear sister, there are more important things in the world than nose rings." "Not if they're made of pearls," said the Snork Maiden. "Now you've broken the point of your pencil again. Doesn't anybody want to eat this evening?" "Yes, I do," shouted Sniff. "We will adjourn the meeting until tomorrow morning," said the Snork with a sigh. "There's never any order when girls are about." "Don't take it so seriously," said his sister, and began to take plates out of a little basket. "It would be much better if you collected some wood for me. Besides, we shall be quite safe in this cave in Moomin Valley, so what are you worrying about?" "Why, what a wonderful idea!" exclaimed Moomin Troll, looking at her in admiration. "How clever of you to think of it! Of course, we can hide in the cave when the comet comes." "In my cave," squeaked Sniff proudly. "We'll roll stones across the opening and cover the hole in the roof and take lots of food down there and a lantern. Won't it be exciting?" "Well, now we'll have to have a meeting anyway," said the Snork. "We must organize a working party." "Yes, yes," said his sister impatiently. "How about that wood? And Sniff, will you go and fetch some water from the marsh, please?" Sniff and the Snork set off, and the Snork Maiden went on laying the table. "Moomin Troll, will you pick some flowers for the table?" she said. "What color would you like?" he asked. The Snork Maiden looked at herself and saw that she was still pink. This had come over her when Moomin Troll gave back the ring, you remember. "Well," she said, "I think blue flowers would suit me best." So Moomin Troll trotted off to find some. "And what can I do?" asked Snufkin. "Play something for me, please," said the Snork Maiden. So Snufkin took out his mouth organ and played a song about the blue horizon. It was a long time before the Snork came back with the wood. "Well, there you are at last," said his sister. "It took quite a time," said the Snork, "because of course I had to find pieces that were all exactly the same length." "Is he always so particular?" asked Snufkin. "He was born like that," said the Snork Maiden. "Where's Sniff without water?" But Sniff hadn't found any water. The marsh was dried up. Only a little mud lay at the bottom, and all the poor water lilies had died. He went further into the wood and found a stream, but that was dry too. It was most extraordinary. At last Sniff returned crestfallen to the camp. "I think all the water in the world must have dried up," he said. "We must discuss the matter," said the Snork, but his sister had a better idea. "Sniff, didn't you have a bottle of lemonade?" she asked, and when he brought one out she emptied it into the saucepan with some berries, and produced the most wonderful fruit soup that you could imagine. "But soup isn't the only thing we have to worry about," said the Snork thoughtfully. "There must be some reason why all the water has dried up." "It's probably because the sun is so hot," said Snufkin. "Or else the comet," said Sniff, and they all looked up at the sky. It was a dull red in the gathering darkness, and there, just above the tree tops, something shone. A little red spark like a distant star. It didn't move, but it seemed to flicker and burn as if it were very hot. The Snork Maiden shivered and crept nearer to the fire. "Oh dear," she said, "it doesn't look very friendly." And her color slowly changed from pink to mauve. While they sat and looked at the comet, Moomintroll came puffing up with a bunch of bluebells. "It wasn't very easy to find them," he said. "Thank you very much," said the Snork Maiden, "but I really should have asked for yellow flowers. You see, I've changed color again." "Oh, dearie me," said Moomintroll sadly. "Shall I find you some others?" And then he too caught sight of the comet shining over the tree tops. "No, no, don't bother," answered the Snork Maiden. "But please hold my paw. I'm frightened." "You mustn't be," comforted Moomintroll. "We know it won't hit the earth for 3 days, and by that time we shall be home and snug in the cave. Now we'll eat your marvelous soup and then go to sleep." So the Snork Maiden ladled out the soup, and when they had eaten, they all curled up together on the mat which she had woven out of grass. The fire slowly died, but above the dark, silent wood, the comet shone red and ominous. And that's the end of chapter 7 of Comet in Moominland.